I still can't believe what I saw. But well, I won't keep you any longer. Everything happened months ago. I live in the state of Chihuahua, in Ciudad Juarez. I've been in this job for a short time, at least since my father retired, and I took his place. My father taught me many things about this job, so I wouldn't make the same mistakes he did. So thanks to him, I've been able to do a lot. Thanks to his teachings, one thing I like about this job is the freedom it gives you to visit various places in Mexico, at least the ones closest to your state, and that's what I like most about this work. In my job, we deal with all kinds of merchandise, so we just deliver it to a client or the branch that requested it one day. My boss asked me to take a trailer to the border. He wasn't going to pay me much for this, but whatever he gave me was fine. Extra money was extra money. However, something he said unsettled me. He told me under no circumstances to look at the merchandise I was carrying. That seemed quite strange to me. While we sometimes loaded the merchandise or products onto the truck ourselves, the truth is, we rarely saw what we were delivering unless it was something edible. Sometimes I'm accompanied by my work friends on some trips, but this time they didn't assign anyone to me, and they didn't let me bring companions either. I assumed it was because it was a relatively close destination, so I accepted without complaining. Yes, it was all weird, but I hadn't thought too much about not looking at the trailer's contents. After all, whatever was being delivered wasn't my business, so they prepared the truck and hooked up the trailer. Before getting in, my boss came in person, which was unusual since he's always quite busy for that. He approached me and repeated the order not to snoop in the trailer. With that, I got into the truck while my boss stared at me intently. I started my route before it got any later. Soon it was afternoon, and I had several setbacks. Like traffic and people, it was quite congested. In my haste, I wanted to get there as quickly as possible to rest from my long day, as they were giving me 2 days off, and I wanted to spend them with my family. After the traffic jam, I was able to continue my route until I reached the entrance to the main highway. I estimated it would take me about 4 to 5 hours to arrive, so I turned on the radio for a while to pass the time and sing songs at the top of my lungs without anyone interrupting me. Everything was going smoothly, but to be honest, the curiosity about what was in the trailer was killing me. So I decided to wait until I reached the highway, and at nightfall I'd see what the boss was hiding so much. I couldn't handle the intrigue. Slowly, I got closer to my destination. The hours passed so quickly that I hadn't realized it. So I decided to stop the truck on the side of the road. The curiosity was overwhelming. I got out of the truck. The street was completely deserted, and the cold wind reached my feet. I looked for the keys to open the trailer's compartment, and something smelled very different. Without a doubt, no delivery I'd ever carried before smelled like this. I thought it might be some kind of refrigerated meat, but I don't know, it had a very distinct smell. And I know because I have an aunt who owns her own butcher shop in the city. Opened the doors, and the smell grew stronger and stronger. I turned on my phone's flashlight, and then I felt it. A deep, foul odor completely filled my nose. What I saw next left me frozen. There was a pile of bodies stacked throughout the trailer, many mutilated in various parts, all with broken limbs and organs exposed. There were men, women, children, and even babies. This entire scene made me recoil immediately out of instinct. I vomited and backed away, terrified. How was it possible that I'd been carrying these corpses this whole time? I closed the doors as quickly as possible. My hands were trembling as I used the keys, but after a few minutes, I finally locked the door and got back into the truck. Quickly, I was having trouble breathing. I felt like I was going to die. I couldn't believe what I had seen. All this time, my boss knew what I was carrying. But where was I taking them? What were they going to do with them? How did they accept this? At that moment, I couldn't think clearly. This whole situation was messed up, but I wasn't going to end there. No, that's what I would have wanted. But no, I couldn't even keep my hands on the steering wheel. I felt incapable of putting the key back in to start the truck and continue my journey. My mind was a mess. Seeing those decomposed, unrecognizable bodies full of suffering was something I couldn't process. I started the truck as best I could, put my hands on the wheel, and continued my journey as I was supposed to. The entire trip, I didn't say a word. I didn't play any music, didn't turn on the radio. I no longer wanted to sing as cheerfully as I had at the start of my trip. What kind of world is this? Honestly, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know whether to go to the police or complete this delivery. I had no idea what was happening, but one thing I was sure of: the company, and possibly my boss, were heavily involved with criminal groups. If they found out I'd seen this, they'd have me in their sights and could kill me whenever they wanted. The panic from that scene didn't let me think of anything, so I ended up driving the truck to where I was supposed to. I continued my journey until I reached the place where I was to deliver the bodies. People arrived to help me unload the trailer, and then they told me I could leave. Fortunately, they didn't notice how nervous I was. It was obvious they knew what was in the cargo, since many of those people were heavily armed. So, I left immediately when they ordered me to. That hell began upon my return. I felt strange presences inside my truck. I also started hearing the crying of several people. I'd turned down the radio, only to hear nothing afterward. On the road, I thought I saw the silhouettes of several people along the side of the highway. This whole situation was driving me crazy. I thought I was losing my mind. After that infernal journey, I returned home. I didn't tell anyone what I saw because I knew they could find ways to harm my family, my father, or my girlfriend, and honestly, I didn't want that. But shortly after returning home, my hell began. I quit a few months after what happened. I hadn't quit earlier because I didn't want the boss to suspect I knew what his company was doing. At my house, inexplicable things started happening. Objects fell from impossible places when no one was looking. I constantly saw silhouettes of people and completely mutilated children and teenagers. I heard voices and laughter when I was alone at home. Honestly, I didn't know what to do. I'm sure that one day they'll come for me, and that's why I want someone to know my story. I won't die without someone having heard me, and maybe then I can be at peace with all those souls that have been tormenting me every day. Well, listeners, I hope you enjoyed the previous story. Let's move on to the next one. I haven't been in this job for long. I really enjoy traveling on the highway, seeing the landscapes, visiting new places, and also meeting new people. It's one of my favorite parts of my job, though it can sometimes be dangerous for 4 people who aren't from Mexico. There are many dangers on the roads, whether it's drug cartels, kidnappings, murders, accidents, and many other things. However, I'd never felt in any danger. I'm very cautious. I don't like being exposed to unexpected things, and I always come prepared. However, on one of my more recent trips, something extremely strange happened to me that day. They asked me to transport a shipment of merchandise from one state to another to a well-known branch worldwide. I'm from the state of Nuevo León, but they asked me to travel to Oaxaca. The trip was quite long, but the pay was pretty good, so I did it without hesitation. I'm a single man. I still haven't found a girlfriend who accepts how tough this kind of work is. I mean, I've had girlfriends before, but those relationships didn't last long. I don't see this as a bad thing. I don't feel lonely because of my job, though someday I hope to find someone who understands how heavy this kind of work can be. Anyway, it was a normal workday. I'd already packed my bags and was driving on the highway for hours. It was still afternoon, so when night fell, I was going to look for a hostel or motel to rest. A few hours passed when, suddenly, the truck stopped. No matter how hard I tried to start it, I couldn't. It was very strange. It seemed like it wasn't respond to the ignition key. So, I got out of the truck with my phone's flashlight, opened the hood, and checked the engine. Everything seemed fine until I noticed something stuck in one of the engine's gears. I got closer and saw it was a branch or something. It was large but somehow fit perfectly in the gears. How the hell had it gotten there? I couldn't explain it. I removed the branch as best I could, closed the hood, and got back into the truck, and this time it worked normally again. While I was checking the engine, I hadn't noticed it was getting dark. I only realized it when I got back on the road. During that drive, I had a feeling something strange was happening. There was something odd, a strange presence. It gave me goosebumps down my spine. I couldn't quite pinpoint what it was, but I couldn't shake the feeling no matter how hard I tried. I can say I didn't feel safe. It was the first time I felt that way on a trip, and I had no one else with me to share what I was feeling. Not even 20 minutes had passed when the truck stopped again. This was too strange now. Once might happen to anyone, but twice was already very concerning. I got out of the truck again to check the engine again. I still didn't understand why this was happening. The truck was regularly maintained and had never given me these kinds of problems. While I was illuminating the engine, I noticed something cutting some wires. This couldn't be good. Suddenly, I heard a child's giggle. It sounded playful and mischievous. I turned to look at the road, but there was no one behind me. I thought I was going crazy. I took out my phone and called for a mobile mechanic, but given the hour, they told me they'd arrive by 9 a.m. at the latest and would send one of the best mechanics to fix the truck. While I was talking, I got back into the truck, but I saw something on the passenger seat. It looked like a small creature, maybe a goblin or something. I could say it looked like a collector's item, like the porcelain dolls that grandmothers or collectors have them. How the hell had it gotten into my truck? Had it been there the whole time without me noticing? Maybe one of the other drivers left it behind. Honestly, I didn't know, but I also didn't remember seeing it on the seat when I got in earlier. This strange thing was wearing a loincloth with several tapestries. The road was also completely deserted, so it was impossible for someone to have placed it there while I was outside the truck. I approached carefully to examine the doll, but suddenly it seemed to blink. I shook my head, thinking it was impossible. I looked at it again closely, and this time, not only blinked again, but started smiling. It had a giggle like a child's, playful and mischievous, but something about it told me it wasn't like that. Out of nowhere, the thing lunged at my face with its mouth open. Its teeth were as sharp as needle. It scratched my face several times. For something so small, it had incredible strength. I tried to break free with all my might. I struggled with the creature for several minutes until it bit my hand. I screamed in pain, and it let go, then ran off down the road with a malicious laugh this time. What the hell was that thing? There was a bit of blood from the wound, but luckily, with my emergency kit, I was able to apply some alcohol and cover it. I never saw that thing again, and fortunately, the wound it left on my hand wasn't deep at all. Something I don't talk about often from my trips is that after that incident, many things in my house started disappearing out of nowhere all the time. I'd lose keys, papers, objects, and when I finally found them in some remote corner of my house, they were always broken, torn, or damaged. My grandma says what attacked me was a chink, and it seems it won't rest until it drags me to the underworld. Well, listeners, I hope you enjoyed the previous story. Let's move on to the next one. I started this job a long time ago. I got into this work thanks to a friend of my dad's. Although my dad was the one who taught me to drive since I was 15, there are many legends and mysteries surrounding this job, especially because, believe it or not, there are many haunted places here in Mexico. I'm from the state of Veracruz and grew up far from the coastlines. However, when possible, we'd go on vacation with my family. After getting my driver's license, my dad sent me to work with his friend, at least when I came of age. I started with small tasks before I could have my own truck, so I worked hard to earn my place in the company. This story happened to me relatively recently, a few months ago. Sometimes I'm accompanied by a colleague, and other times I go alone to deliver the merchandise. Often, it's to help reduce the workload of unloading boxes or products we transport, or to have someone as a substitute driver. I generally like to be driven, accompanied, not only because it keeps me from getting too tired while driving, but also because I hate being alone. But when they send me alone, there's not much I can do. I'm currently engaged to my girlfriend, so I want to save up to live alone soon. You could say I'm a millennial, as I'm not over 50 but not under 20 either. So it's kind of weird for my generation, I guess. A few days before, they told me I had to travel to deliver products to another state, which was San Luis Potosi. I figured it'd be a long trip, so I decided to ask my friend if he wanted to join me so I could drive more calmly. He agreed without issue. Alberto is one of my best friends. He's about 3 years older than me, but he's never left me alone on the trips the company has sent us on. I went to pack a small bag with essentials for 3 or 4 days at most, max. I said goodbye to my family and girlfriend, and the next morning we met at the station where we'd get on the assigned truck. My friend said he wanted to drive the first shift, and I agreed without issue. During the first few hours of the trip, we listened to music, talked about our lives, shared anecdotes, and told jokes. It was a pleasant few hours, but after a while, when we ran out of topics, I fell asleep. I don't know how many hours I was asleep, but when I woke up, I noticed we were stranded in the middle of the highway, and it was pouring rain. You could barely see anything through the windshield. With this weather, it was quite difficult and dangerous to drive, and there wasn't a hostel nearby either. Alberto, somewhat frustrated, said we had to wait until the rain eased up. I told him it was fine, that we could wait a bit. I guess my friend relaxed a little. After 2 hours of rain and an hour of playing cards, we got back on the road. It's well known that in Mexico, and also in some Latin American countries, there are dangers to traveling on the roads: thieves, drug lords, vagrants, homeless people, car accidents, and even killers. Everything was going calmly those hours. Nothing strange had happened yet. After exiting a curve near a ravine, we came onto a less traveled road. My friend said he'd taken that route to cut down on travel time, and it seemed like a good idea to me since we wouldn't be late finding a good hostel. Suddenly, we felt a jolt. Something had hit the truck. Alberto stopped immediately, and we got out to see what the problem was. I pulled out my phone's flashlight and pointed it where the sound had come from. Turns out the tire had gone flat. We looked to see what could have caused it, and there it was, a huge pothole underneath. Now we had to change the tire, and we were in the middle of nowhere. So we went to the truck's storage, pulled out the spare tire, and Alberto took out his phone since we wouldn't be able to change it alone ourselves. Alberto called a mechanic to come help us. This was going to delay our delivery. Why the hell do these things happen to us? The mechanic said it'd take him about an hour to reach us due to our location. Suddenly, I saw some smoke in the distance, from the foliage just on the other side of the barrier. Hey, there are people over there, right? We could ask for help to change the tire. This'll be faster, I said to Alberto. But Alberto didn't think it was a good idea. He told me it was better to wait for the tow truck, but I insisted. I saw hesitation on my friend's face. He looked uncertain and worried. However, he let out a sigh and looked at me with resignation. So, we decided to go ask for help. We left the motorcycle secured and set off. Luckily, no one was passing on the road, and we could see something in the distance, so we could walk without losing sight of the truck. I never imagined there'd be a village nearby in these places. My friend said the same. After crossing the dense foliage around, we found a bonfire. It wasn't very big, but it was cozy. The people were dressed in casual clothes, despite the cold wind, and the flame didn't go out. There were about 20 people at most, and they seemed quite cheerful. I greeted them. Hey, sorry, we got stranded on the road and need help changing a tire. One of them approached me. He was an older man, wearing a white shirt and jeans, with a grey beard and a very kind smile. Of course, you arrived just in time, he said. The man offered us some drinks. I asked what they were celebrating. Was it some kind of saint or something? The old man said it was something much better. So, I accepted the drink without issue. However, Alberto told me not to drink it. We didn't know what it might contain. He whispered it to me, of course. But I decided to ignore Alberto's advice and followed the man. Looking back now, I don't know why the hell I agreed to follow him. The whole place seemed very strange. Maybe it was because of the old man's kindness and the people there. I'm not sure. Everyone seemed to be celebrating something important. Suddenly, I heard a stifled scream, but it wasn't from me or the people around us. It was from Alberto, who was staring at the ground in horror. I didn't know what he was seeing, but I slowly lowered my gaze and noticed a trail of dried blood on the dry grass. I couldn't see it entirely, but it formed a circle. I immediately stepped back. My friend grabbed me by the shirt, and we ran away from those strange people. The people around tried to block our way, but my friend and I were quite skilled at sports, so we managed to dodge them without issue. My adrenaline was at 100% as I ran through the dense foliage. When I glanced back, I saw those people carrying torches and what looked like machetes, axes, and knives. We ran for several minutes, though it felt like we'd been escaping for hours. After what seemed like an eternity, we could see the road. Those people started throwing things, but we managed to dodge everything quite easily. It's pretty hard to hit something moving, especially in such dense foliage. Finally, we reached the road. Luckily, at that moment, several cars were passing by, and our pursuers realized this, so they decided to leave us alone. I thought we were saved. My adrenaline was through the roof, and now I was just laughing nervously at the situation. When I turned to look at Carlos and tell him we'd made it, he had a pale face and gave me a small smile before collapsing to the ground. I didn't know what was happening until I saw it. Alberto had a large axe embedded in his back. and blood was pouring from the wound. When had this happened? I don't know, but it wasn't time to think. I rushed to help my friend, and the cars that were passing by even stopped to assist. But unfortunately, nothing could be done. My friend was gone, and it was my fault. I could never recover from that. I don't work for the company anymore now. Even seeing the company's uniform causes me immense pain, and everything reminds me of Alberto and how my stubbornness led to his loss of life. Although the incident was reported to the police, they never found the culprits. It was months ago, and I still haven't gotten over his death. Even though I'm now with another company, it's because of all these things that I now hate traveling alone. Well, listeners, I hope you enjoyed the previous story. Let's move on to the next one. My name is Manuel. I was born and raised in Mexico, in a small town. You could say I'm from San Luis Potosi, so in a close-knit community, many legends were told throughout the town. As a child, all those stories scared me because sometimes my older siblings would tell them, but my mother always comforted me, saying they weren't real and everything would be fine. I joined this job at the insistence of my brother, who was 2 years older than me. He had gotten a better job and needed someone to replace him, preferably family, so I accepted. They welcomed me warmly, and I couldn't have been happier without knowing how difficult and heavy this job would be. But not for the reasons you might think it was for other things. That time, they were sending me to deliver some toys to a branch in another state. They were sending me from San Luis Potosi to Puebla, which would be a few hours' drive, so I accepted without complaint. That morning, I got into the truck at the station, arranged my light luggage, and started the truck. The first few hours of the drive went quite well. The atmosphere was calm, and I was driving relaxed. I still had plenty of time before delivering the merchandise. Every so often, I'd send messages to my family and girlfriend to let them know I was okay. Remember what I told you about how superstitious the people in my town were? Well, back then, I was scared of all kinds of horror things, but I was most afraid of one day running into one of those things and having neither my parents or siblings there to help me. Everyone knows about the urban legends and stories that were told about schools built under cemeteries. The girl or boy in the bathrooms, the parents who haunt schools, ghosts that roamed towns, or ghosts seen at schools late at night. All those stories terrified me. I'd get tense and want to sleep with my siblings or parents. As the hours passed, it started to get dark. I turned on the truck's high beams to see better and continued my journey. I had to drive a few more hours, then find a nearby hotel to recharge. I didn't take my eyes off the road, but throughout the drive, I noticed a small figure recurring. For a moment, I thought it was my lack of sleep playing tricks on me. Then, on the right corner of the road, near a guardrail, I saw a little girl. She was raising her hands while cars just ignored her. I noticed it was a child. I stopped immediately, got out of the truck quickly, and approached her level. She seemed confused, her gaze lost, and she didn't seem to speak either. Her parents didn't seem to be nearby either. I invited her to sit in the passenger seat and put on her seatbelt while I thought about how insensitive people were for seeing a child on the street and not helping her. I planned to take the child to the nearest police station. At first, I didn't notice anything strange, but as we went further, the situation seemed weirder. Why was this child alone? I asked her where her parents were, but she just kept staring ahead and didn't respond. However, though she didn't speak, she did hum a song, which, if I recall correctly, was Twinkle, Twinkle, little star. The child's clothes looked in good condition. She didn't seem to have suffered violence or an attack before getting into my truck. All of this seemed strange, but there were also things that didn't add up in my mind. This child was calmer than anyone could imagine. Her gaze remained lost in the horizon. She was quiet and rarely moved. She didn't kick or fidget like other kids I knew. No, this child was different, and all of this started to give me a bad feeling. Suddenly, I glanced at the child. She was smiling despite keeping her lost gaze. So, I decided to ask why she was smiling, to which she replied that she was glad someone had finally helped her after so long. So long. Exactly what did she mean by that? I asked why she was alone and where her parents were, and her response left me completely frozen. She answered that she hadn't seen them in a long time because she had died because of one of them. What followed left me completely paralyzed. It turns out she was a normal child. She didn't remember her name, but did remember her family. She had no siblings, and her parents often fought. One day, her mother and father had a fight, so she decided to hide. In her room, there was shouting until suddenly there was silence. Then her mother came into her room and hit her with a hammer on the head. She said when she woke up, she was no longer at home but on the highway, and no matter how much she wanted to return home, she always ended up in the same place. I was completely in shock. I couldn't say a word. At that moment, the child laughed, and in the blink of an eye, she simply disappeared from the truck. I never saw that child again. Since then, I only hope that wherever she is, she's found the peace she was seeking, and was able to return home. Very well, listeners. Let's move on to the last story of the night, the famous Deja Vu, an event you feel like you've already lived but is very likely to have happened before. I think throughout our lives, we can experience a couple of these, but they should be over years, not several times in one night, right? How are you? A pleasure to greet you. Good evening to the entire community. My name is Jason Caceres. I'm 25 years old, and I've been a truck driver by profession for a year now. At first, I didn't like it, but over time, I grew fond of it, and dedicating myself to this has been very rewarding for me. I mainly work transporting food across my country, Colombia. Sometimes it's agricultural products, and other times it can be perishable or non-perishable foods. Depending on the region I'm in, the story I want to tell you happened during a trip where I had to travel from the city of Bogotá, the capital of Colombia, to the city of Villavicencio, the capital of the Meta department, located in the eastern plains. This road is commonly known as the Via al Llano, and in terms of travel time, it's really short. It only takes about 2 or 3 hours to cross it. Normally, it's not a road to travel at night, but this time I had to. I was coming from a trip from the coffee region and had to drop off a considerable load of coffee in Bogotá. Then load the truck with about 4 tons of fruit and head to Villavicencio as quickly as possible so the fruit would arrive fresh as possible. The schedule was really tight. I couldn't afford to delay much, and I had the bad luck of there being a landslide on the highway connecting Bogotá to Jurado, all due to the constant rains those days. So, you could imagine the chaos on the road. I arrived in Bogotá about 5 hours later than planned. Everything was a mess, and I had to rush to deliver the coffee load, pick up the fruit, and immediately take the Via al Llano to Villavicencio. I couldn't wait until the next day, since an important portion of the cargo could spoil. With all these setbacks, I ended up taking the Via Al at around 10 p.m., A really terrible time to drive on a road with landslide risks and an insane amount of cliffs. But there was nothing I could do, so I had to hurry. Driving a truck in Peru is a challenging task because many of the roads tend to be somewhat difficult, not because they're poorly built or designed, but because of the geography of this beautiful country. Many roads have to cross or skirt mountains or cliffs. Along the Biel Llano, there are several towns, one of the first being Choachi. I'd been driving for too many hours, and there wasn't much time left on the drive, and I was really tired. So, I stopped to eat something at a rest stop there in that town. I only intended to have a strong coffee with an unhealthy amount of caffeine, but the food smelled so good it was irresistible. I ended up having dinner there while I was at it. The waitress recommended a nearby place to spend the night, but I immediately told her that as soon as I finished my meal, I had to continue. She gave me a somewhat perplexed look and, the next moment later, insisted that I should spend the night in the town and leave in the morning. Initially, I thought she was just trying to get a customer for someone she knew or something, but she immediately clarified that, because we were in the rainy season, the road could become dangerous, and secondly, she emphasized, because the fact it was going to be a foggy night. The first made sense, and the second, I assumed, meant the danger due to limited visibility. However, it wasn't about that. She said that in several of the following towns, like La Calera and Guayabetel, strange things happened during dense, foggy nights. I don't know how this sounds to you, but to me, personally, this sounded like something really ridiculous. And though she kept talking, I decided to ignore such nonsense, so I ignored anything that came out of her mouth, paid, and headed to my truck. As I got in, the from before, from a distance, gave me a strange look that, without saying a single word, felt as though it said, "I warned you." People living in towns are generally very superstitious and tend to firmly believe in their superstitions. However, I didn't know why, but this woman with that look gave me the impression that what she said weren't just simple superstitions. I immediately shook that thought from my head, started my truck, and set off toward Villa. I really didn't want to make any more stops, but of course, it depended on my physical condition as I progressed. I could see that at least the woman's words about the foggy night were true. I kept driving until I reached La Calera, another town on the Via al Llano road, and had to stop there to rest. It was really frustrating not to be able to keep driving until I reached my final destination. Or maybe I could, but I wasn't sure, and as my late grandfather always said, better safe than sorry. I stopped at a small restaurant to rest a bit and ended up talking to a fellow driver who was also there resting. He said that recently some odd things had been happening on the road. Well, you can imagine I treated this situation exactly like I did with the crazy waitress. I simply ignored anything that came out of this person's mouth. When I'd rested enough, I got back in my truck and once again set off. Now I was on my way to another town along the Via al Llano called Guayabetel. This stretch of road is one of the most dangerous. You have to be very careful with the cliffs and the winding roads. But as long as you take the curves correctly, there shouldn't be any issues. While I was driving, in a distance, on one of the guardrails at the edge of a cliff, there was a child sitting there, staring into the abyss below. I don't need to say how dangerous this is. So, I stopped as close as possible and approached the child slowly to avoid startling him. But when I got close enough to hear, I realized he was crying. It was a bit strange what could have happened. Maybe he was lost. After all, he was dressed in city clothes. But just as I was about to grab him and take him to safety, he was gone. It was strange and really hard to describe a person. Is there one moment and gone the next? That's all that happened. In that moment, it was like I had a brief amnesia. I was wondering what I was doing in that place and telling myself there had been a child there, but there was no one. Maybe amnesia isn't the right word to describe that feeling. I think it could be better defined as severe disorientation, and it might have been due to extreme exhaustion or something else. But at the time, I didn't give it much importance and just returned to the truck. As I was getting in, I could clearly hear a child's crying. But when I turned to look at where I thought the sound was coming from, I saw the same as before, nothing. A bit confused, I started driving again, but not even 5 minutes later, I saw another child sitting on the guardrail at the edge of the cliff, staring into the abyss. At that moment, I was so tired I didn't know if what I was seeing was real or not, so I just kept driving without paying attention to what I saw. I don't know how many times this happened, but I think by the third time seeing the same thing, I stopped. Was it possible I was seeing the same thing over and over? How tired must I have been to start hallucinating like that? Well, there was no clear answer for that, but I was pretty sure that if I didn't stop, I might either keep hallucinating or something much worse could happen. And well, I wasn't even remotely willing to let that probability grow. I got out and looked into the abyss, and suddenly the same child appeared again. This time, I was determined to reach him. So, as soon as he appeared, I rushed toward him. But the next moment, I witnessed something hard to process. The child jumped off the cliff without any hesitation. At that instant, I was pretty sure what I was seeing wasn't a hallucination from sleep or exhaustion. It was very real, and it was a tough sight. I have a 2-year-old son, and I've always loved kids, so seeing a child jump off a cliff like that was too painful to witness. I immediately rushed to the edge of the cliff, but contrary to what I expected, there were no signs of anyone having jumped, but that didn't matter to me. I immediately called emergencies and reported what I'd seen, but due to the remoteness of my vocation, they'd take a while to arrive. Right after hanging up, I heard footsteps behind me, and when I turned to look, unbelievably, I saw the child who had supposedly jumped off the cliff. He was wearing a yellow sweater and red shoes, but there was one disturbing detail. He had my face, but that face had no eyes. Seeing this filled me with deep panic. Can you imagine a child with your exact adult face? I immediately asked who he was, what he wanted, what he was doing there, and a bunch of other questions. The shock of seeing this made me blurt out everything in my mind, even the most absurd and foolish questions. I know it sounds a bit pathetic, but I really had no idea how to react in this situation. I could tell you I was scared, but honestly, I'd be lying about how I felt. I was dumbfounded, while I stood there with my mind blank. The supposed child started running toward me. At that moment, another truck, slightly bigger than mine, was passing by, and since the child was in the middle of the road, he ended up being run over. The driver, instead of stopping to see what had happened, didn't slow down and kept going without even reducing speed. Many might criticize him, but I can understand. Many thieves tend to stand in front of vehicles to make them stop so they can rob the drivers of everything they have. I didn't know how to feel about it. My mind was still blank, but just as I was about to return to my truck, the child lying in the middle of the road suddenly started to get up. A truck bigger than mine ran over a kid, maybe 9 years old, and he got up like nothing happened. Remember how I didn't know what I felt toward that child? Well, at that precise moment, I was pretty sure I was scared of that child. When the child got up, I finally noticed he had no face. He immediately started moving toward me with the erratic walk of a zombie, but much faster than one could ever move. I was somewhat scared, so I immediately started running to escape that kid. I don't know if it was because I was exhausted or because the kid was too fast, but after a few seconds, maybe 10, he caught up to me, made me fall to the ground, and then started dragging me along the road to the spot where I saw him jump. Hey, what are you doing? You're not going to jump off there, right? But contrary to what I expected, the kid's response was nothing but a silence with a somewhat terrifying air, followed by what I suppose was a stare since, as I said before, that child had no face. Just as I planned, the kid intended to throw himself off the cliff, and we were there, I don't know how many minutes, struggling. He might have looked like a child, but he was really strong, and with how tired I was. At certain moments, I thought I was going to fall off the cliff. Moments later, someone shone a light directly on the child's face, and though he had no face, the kid reacted as if the light bothered him. At that same instant, he let me go, and once again, without any hesitation, the child threw himself off the cliff. It turned out the person who shone the light on the child's face was a police officer, who had arrived with several colleagues. Apparently, they'd come to the location because of the call I'd made earlier, but upon seeing the faceless child, they were too shocked and immediately demanded to know what was happening. I told them absolutely everything that had happened, and though it was really hard to believe what I was saying, they had all seen the faceless child, so they kept an open mind. They told me they were going to treat this as if nothing had happened and that, since my call was anonymous, I wouldn't face any consequences. It seemed a bit incompetent on their part, but there was nothing I could do. If I put myself in their shoes, writing a report on this situation would be really complicated. Not to mention that very likely no one would believe anything they said. Just as they were about to leave, I begged them to please escort me. They were a bit confused by this request, but immediately, with a trembling voice, I told them I didn't know exactly how many times that child had appeared to me that same night, and that, on top of that, I'd already seen him jump several times. So, I told them he might appear in the next 5 meters, or the next 5 kilometers. I said I was really scared and wasn't very willing to keep encountering that apparition. After much insistence, they agreed to escort me to the next town, Guayabital, and there I had to find lodging and spend the night. I had a lot to lose, but I wasn't willing to face that again. Fortunately, I was able to rest enough, wake up early the next day, and finally head to Villavicencio without any additional stops. When I arrived at the place where I had to deliver all the fruit, most of it was in perfect condition, but they understood due to the landslide I'd faced before entering Bogota, so I wasn't penalized. This has been one of the strangest and most terrifying experiences I've ever had, but fortunately, I made it out unharmed and can tell you this story.